Hey everyone. Okay, let's first of all, I'll recap really quickly how to create a terrain, how to create a terrain and sculpt it, and some good tips on how to make it nice. And then I will actually also show you how to paint it, to color it, because I don't believe I went over that before. So I'll just really quickly go over the easy way to do that. So let's dive right in. So you see, first of all, I've got my sort of default Unity project that I've got nothing in basically. I've got just basically my first person controller, my directional light, and a plane. And the plane, of course, was being used as the ground, but we don't need that anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that because we want to make a terrain which already has the collision set up and is much nicer, and much easier to work with in terms of creating a terrain that feels more interesting than something just perfectly flat. So to create a terrain, first step is to create one, to drop it in. So if we go to game object, 3D object, and terrain, bam, there it is. Now, before we even do anything else with this terrain, if you look at this terrain, it's actually really massive. Keep in mind that Unity is a game engine, and games tend to be large. Like this would be a level, right? They're assuming that you're going to create this large world to run around in, whereas these projects that we're doing are much smaller in scope. You don't have time to do an entire level or an entire world, so we're keeping the scope really small, and which means we want to. Let me adjust my gain real quick. We want to keep the scope a little bit lower, smaller. I mean, meaning we want to shrink this down. This is actually huge, and we want to shrink it down. So the way to do that is not the scale tool. Now you might think, oh look, the scale tool works. That's not what we want to do. That's not going to achieve the same results that we really want. Shrinking it scale wise could actually cause some problems, and it's not going to actually lower the resolution of the model. And if you don't lower the resolution, it can take a lot longer to bake. It can take a lot longer to build. It's basically still going to be a huge world. It's just going to be shrunk into a smaller size, which just doesn't make sense. You're not really getting the benefit of shrinking it like legitimately. So the way to actually shrink it, the way you should really shrink it, as soon as you open this and create a terrain, go over here to this gear, in these terrain buttons. There's the gear, which is the settings for the terrain, and then scroll down towards the bottom, and you see this resolution. This resolution here this is really what you need to be shrinking. And I would suggest the easiest thing to do, just to make life simple and give you a good starting point, is just take 1 0. Take 1 0 off of each of these numbers. So width, length, and height. Just take 1 0 off. I'm going to go ahead and leave the rest of these values the same. I'll go ahead, and that's fine. It's just we don't need this to be such a massive open area. Okay, so this is a much better starting point. But make sure you do this. If you do nothing else, make sure you do this. Otherwise, your scenes could take forever to build. You might freak out and go, oh my god, it's taking my computer like 3 days to build my environment. Sorry, I'm just saying. Make sure this setting you change for sure. Okay, but now that we've changed that setting, we can actually start playing around with this and creating an environment. So first of all, the first person controller starts off way over in the corner. Oops, don't need that to be too big. And let me just sort of maximize this as much as I can. Okay. There we go. And in fact, I could probably even move some of this stuff. In fact, let's do this. I'm going to move my project window up here just so that it's kind of out of the way, and then I'll close this one. Don't really want to see that. There we go. Just so we can see my my scene a little bit better. And I think we're good on this. So there we go. just want to maximize the viewport a little bit more so you get a better sense of sort of what's happening. Now the first-person controller, like I was saying, I'll go back to the hierarchy panel here. I can scoot it in towards the middle, since probably going to want to spawn it somewhere in the middle of this environment. And I'll scoot it up a little just to make sure it's not embedded in the floor. And notice, by the way, I'm always going to select my first-person controller in this hierarchy panel and then move it. Selecting it in the viewport can cause problems. I've seen people... Don't forget that this has two layers to it. There's the first-person FPS controller group, and then there's this underneath it. And if you select the wrong one, there's a lot of potential for screwing up the camera. And if you screw up the camera, suddenly you can look left and right, but you can't look up and down. Or... I don't know, all kinds of things. And also remember, never scale the camera. Never scale the camera. That can cause all kinds of problems as well. Scale your environment to match the camera. Don't scale the camera. Scaling the camera can definitely break things. And I say that all the time. I say it all the time, and yet people still do it. So don't scale the camera. Okay. So we've got, it looks like a flat plane again, right? Like, okay, what's the big deal? You know, we got rid of the plane and now we've got another plane. Well, this plane is sculptable. So if we go into the terrain, we select it. There's these tools here at the front, raise, lower terrain, click to, and it has instructions right there. Click to raise, hold down shift to lower. So, okay, that's cool. And in fact, I've got my, Cintiq I'm using right now, so I can just sort of zoom in and actually I'll crank up my brush size. I'll get the cat hair off of my Wacom pen. But I'll crank up the brush size. I'll leave the opacity kind of low, just so it doesn't shoot up real fast. But I can basically start clicking on this terrain and raising up like hills, right? Which is nice. Okay, that's cool. I can raise the hills. I can, kind of create sort of mountain ranges and hills and whatever. Now, and then it says hold shift to basically hold shift to push in, right? To lower the terrain. Okay, so I hold shift. Well, okay, that's kind of working. Oh, something else I just noticed. So my it's trying to adjust my lighting every time I click right now, which is probably choking my CPU a little. So what I'm going to do, and this is a good advice for you all, as you're doing terrain especially, go into your window, lighting, settings, and it's going to pop up for me on the wrong monitor, of course. This is so painful. I hate it when it does this. Okay, this is why you should be really careful not to lose that lighting window. Let's see if they fix this, though. Let's see if they fix this. No. I got these windows back, but not my lighting window. So, okay, that's really obnoxious. So this should get all of my windows back, but of course it doesn't. Yeah, that lighting window, it disappears and it's a real pain to get back. So let me try something. Let me pause the recording real quick and see if I can get that lighting window back. 1 second. Okay. I think we're back. Let me see. Yeah, okay, so here's the funny thing, and this is just a good tip for you all. Oops, let's see. If you ever lose that lighting window, like I literally lost that lighting window for about 2 weeks straight, like maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks, where I could not get this lighting window right here. This little tab right here, which now I can't. There we go. Usually it starts out usually as a floating panel here. Oops. Oh my god. This is driving me crazy. Okay. So it usually starts out as a floating panel like this, and now my Unity is all over the place. 1 second. Okay, sorry for the interruptions. This is Unity's UI can be ridiculous at times. Okay, but anyways, so especially this lighting panel, this should be a word of warning for all of you. Like I said, I lost this lighting panel because it usually opens as a floating window, which is fine. In most programs, I like that. I like scoot my windows onto my other monitors so I have a much larger viewport, and that's how I prefer to work normally. However, I lost this window because it kept opening. The window would open on a different monitor, like I was working on a different machine at work, and then I went home, and it kept trying to open on a monitor that doesn't exist, because it was a monitor at work, and it kept remembering that other monitor which I don't have at home. I have multiple monitors, but they're in different positions. Point is, I couldn't get that window back. Like, I literally uninstalled Unity and reinstalled Unity, and it still wouldn't come back. And I need this window to do any sort of decent lighting. It's a really critical window. Point is, the solution, which I found out like a week and a half later, after researching forums and trying to troubleshoot for like a week and a half, I finally found, just accidentally sort of stumbled across this. I had to literally yank the monitor cable out of my monitor while Unity was open with that window open. That's the only thing that would work. And then all my windows snapped to my other monitor, including the lighting window. But that was the only way I can get it back. Even uninstalling the program didn't actually fix it. So, word of warning, make sure you don't lose this window. In fact, I always dock it now. I dock it right next to my inspector panel so that it's stuck there and it won't disappear and get lost. So that's what I do for now. I'm very cautious with this window now. Anyways, sorry, long story short, I'm going to turn off this auto-generate settings. This auto-generate for the lighting, I don't want it to keep trying to regenerate my lighting every time I make a brush stroke on my terrain. Because that's going to slow down my computer. It's going to make things kind of grind to a halt, and it's not going to be very good. And it's pointless, because I don't want it to constantly regenerate lighting every time I make a stroke, because it's just going to recalculate and then recalculate and recalculate, and it's never going to actually finish. So there's no point having this turned on until I'm done. Once I'm done doing stuff and I'm ready for it to bake lighting, then I can turn it back on. So that'll kind of free up some CPU for you while you work. So I'll turn that off. I'll go back to the inspector panel, go back to my terrain, and once again, let me just sort of do what I can to maximize this area. Move my project panel up here, sort of tear off my console, and close it. Don't really need that. Go back to the hierarchy panel. Okay, so yeah, what I was saying was, I've got these hills that I created. I can hold shift to sort of paint down, right? But you notice, like, what if I want to like create like a river? Like, I want to create a river or a valley. If I'm holding shift and I just can't seem to go any deeper than this. Like, I can push those hills back down, and I can bring hills back up, but I can't go deeper than that original plane depth. And that is because this is the ultimate bottom floor of this terrain. If you want to be able to carve valleys and rivers and that sort of thing, which makes sense, of course you do, what you need to do is a little trick that I found over here, where if you go to this second brush here, where it says paint height, you can actually you can sample a height, or you can choose a height right here. So you can choose a height, let's say, I don't know, let's just say 20, and you can click flatten. And you see what happens is it jumps. This whole area jumps up to this level. It jumps up to level 20, basically, of height, right? Which is cool, because now, if I want, I can go back to, let's say, this regular one, and hold shift, and now I can hold shift and carve deeper than what that original sort of level is, which is great. And I can still go higher as well if I want. And let's see, brush size is 100. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's see. Again, just remember, when you're creating a terrain, you always want to sort of wall in the player, right? You want to wall in the player so that they can't get out, and also not so that they can't see the edge of the you don't want them to be able to see the edge of the world, right? The edge of the universe, as it were. So I'm just going to go ahead and really quickly throw down some sort of interesting hill shapes, and then I'll maybe carve down a bit as well. And then something else that's nice to use this second one for, this paint height, is I can hold shift, where see there's instructions again right here, hold shift to sample target height. I can hold shift, I can point at like let's say a level, let's say maybe this level, and then I'll click. Now I'm just clicking, just tapping, just sample. And as soon as I tap that, you see how it's adjusting the height value? It's sampling that height value and filling that number in here. So that now if I paint with that height value, it's going to create a plateau, which is great. Because it's like, okay, now there's a nice flat plateau that I could put, some sort of structures on, or or a lake, or anything like that. So or a road, if you want a nice flat road, you could then shrink your brush size and sort of carve roads into the sides of the mountains or whatever. So that's a really useful thing there. And ever since I discovered that, I was like, oh well, that makes a lot more sense. Because creating terrains, it's similar to digital sculpting, and again, using a Wacom tablet is ideal for this. However, you're painting a height map, which isn't really the same as digital sculpting. There's limitations, but these height maps, these terrains do work well. They play well with the game engine, so they're a little more optimized. Because if you tried to throw a sculpture in as a terrain, you just throw a Mudbox file in as your terrain, you could. It's just really not going to be very efficient. There's a reason that these terrains exist in these applications. Otherwise, everyone would just use Mudbox or some sort of digital sculpting program, and you wouldn't need these terrains. But these terrains are optimized to basically be more efficient, CPU wise and that sort of thing. So that way, it doesn't your game engine doesn't crash and burn when you try to import it. Anyways, so let me pull up a little more around here. Like, I really want to make sure that I've got no chance of the player getting out. And I'm trying to kind of be somewhat artistic, but I'm really not putting a lot of thought or effort into it because I don't really have time. I want to make sure to crank this tutorial out and not waste your time. But of course, you should take a lot of time, and you should, have fun with it and make something really cool. But so I'm just, again, I sampled the height again, and I'm sort of now trying to block in some stuff. Let me sample the height up here and just kind of make a nice sort of cliff up there, kind of plateau, just because that feels more interesting. Because you don't want everything to be a peak. You don't want peaks everywhere, because that just kind of feels a little boring. Let's see. Let me go back to this one. But some peaks here, some peaks there, some sort of rolling hills around. The only problem with rolling hills is you do need to make sure that you make sure that the level of the hills. Basically the slope. You want to make sure the slope is not walkable, so that the player can't walk up the slope and then get out of the scene there, because that could be bad. Again, you want to wall them in so they can't get out. Okay, sort of clean this up a little. I do want to make sure I've got room for a structure, though. Let me put just a little bit of maybe a pond there. That could be fun. Now, you will see some issues where you'll get the cliff side. Whenever you have a slope that's super steep and it becomes like a cliff, that's okay. But I'll tell you right now, when you do texture it, it's gonna and also for lighting purposes, it's gonna look pretty bad. Those really extreme angle slopes, like cliffs, straight up and down, they're gonna look bad when they render. So ideally, what you'd want to do, if you really want to get serious about this, ideally what you want to do is that's where you would put go into Mudbox and sculpt a cliff face. Sculpt a cliff face to to then put up against the side of the cliff, because that will look a lot better, and you could then custom paint it and try to sort of match the cliff face paint job and like that sort of stuff. Sort of blend it with the with whatever you did to the terrain textures. That's gonna look the best. It'll basically it'll get rid of any kind of gross stretching that the textures will have on from the terrain issues. So, anyways, that would be ideal. Again, I don't really have time to do that right now, but so you'll know what I'm talking about when you see the colors appear. It'll look pretty gross and pretty stretchy. So, anyways, anywhere you can already kind of see it. You can already see where there's kind of jaggedy edges and stuff. That's where you'd want to like patch that up with models. You want to put some like custom 3D models that look like rocks or cliff faces or something to hide that stretchy grossness. So most of the slopes and most of the flatter areas, like the plateaus, should look pretty decent if you find a decent material. Speaking of materials, let's move on to that. Actually, no, before I get too crazy, let's test this. Again, you should always test. And especially, creating terrains, of course you want to test it for scale, right? So make sure my terrain is sort of, make sure my controller, is above the terrain, somewhere where it's not going to fall into a ravine. And let's just hit play and see what happens. Cool. All right. And you notice it looks kind of funky. It doesn't look like white or anything. That's just because, again, I turned off my lighting. So my light baking is sort of on pause at the moment. So I can fill this with some water. I'll get like a nice little water. There's a lot of prefabs. If you download some of the prefabs for water, as far as I'm concerned, it'd be nice if you download a water prefab and then tweak it to look like candy. Since the whole idea is, we're trying to make gingerbread house, theme. So if you took the water prefab and made it look like Jello or some sort of colorful candy sort of texture, or soda. Cat was clawing my leg. You know what I'm saying? Try to stick with the theme. So don't just leave it as water. Colorize it so that it feels more like a soda or something interesting. That'd be a lot more, entertaining and interesting. Okay, but anyways, yeah. So this feels pretty decent scale wise. I can go with this, and we could definitely fit a nice structure in around here somewhere. And then there's some nice kind of flowing, interesting terrain. I'm sure I didn't create the slopes good enough. I know that I'm going to be able to get out. Again, I should really wall things off. What I should do is change the slope abilities on the first person controller. I should probably raise the mountains a little higher, a little steeper. But whatever. I'm still just trying to throw this together for you guys. So enough of that. Let's teach you how to colorize it. So what you need to do is, I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit here. Let me show you. If you click on the terrain, you select the terrain, there's this middle one, the very middle button, the paintbrush, right? So, that sounds pretty straightforward, right? Oh, it's a paintbrush. And look, you've got different brushes that you can use. Stars. I'm not really sure why you want that one. It's kind of, unless you're doing some silly, super cartoony thing. Anyways, but yeah, so there's a bunch of different brushes here. But you really can't do anything with them yet because it says textures, no terrain textures defined. We have to go get some terrain textures and then use those to basically add. You click edit textures, add texture, and this little window here pops up, and you add a color texture and a normal map texture, which is cool. But first of all, we don't have any color textures yet, and once we get a color texture, it'd be nice to create a normal map out of that color texture. But for now, let's just look at colors. In fact, I don't think I'm even going to get into creating normal maps for this. Let's just stick with color. Normal maps are really neat, and they do add a lot to it. Maybe I'll do a separate video later on that shows you how to create a normal map from a photo or from a color texture. But for now, let's keep it simple. So we need a color texture, and here's the other thing. It also needs to be a tiling texture. So let me show you what that means. the good news is the internet is full of these, right? So if I just type in tiling texture in a Google search and go to images. Now I want to show you something. There's a bunch of them here. All right, keep my cat out of the way. There's a bunch of them here, but some of these are going to work and some aren't. Like this one right here, 1600 by 1800 or 1600 by 800. Sorry, that's not going to work because it's not square. You need a square. In fact, you need a power of 2 texture, which I ran into the other day. I just assumed you always needed to just have a square texture, but you actually need to have a power of 2 for Unity in this particular case. Not for every texture, but for your terrain textures you do, for sure. So your terrain textures. See here, 2048 by 2048. There's 1024 by 1024. These are all power of 2 square textures. Any of these would work. This one may not be power of 2. 2048, 1024. I would just say look for a 1024. 1024 is probably ideal. So look for any of these that are like square and power of 2. You could actually throw down and use as your tiling texture. Some would work better than others, but the point is they're all just kind of generic, right? Since we are doing gingerbread house themed things, check this out. This is really funny. I don't know why, but the internet has thought it really important to create candy tiling textures. If you literally just type in candy tiling texture in your search bar, you get a whole bunch of candy tiling textures. These are literally tiling textures that will repeat. They'll tile properly, and they're made of candy. Some of them do have watermarks, which is less than ideal. It is what it is. And again, we're just a bunch of beginners, so. If there's watermarks on your textures, I'm not gonna cry about it, but it'd be nice to avoid them. Now there are ways to obviously there's ways to create these tiling textures, and that's again I think a topic for another specific video. It's a Photoshop exercise, and I know in this particular class we haven't really been using Photoshop because we didn't want to overwhelm you with too many software applications. Anyways, point is. I'll demonstrate that at some point, just for those of you that are interested. It's kind of fun, especially if you do a good job, and you can basically make a custom tiling texture out of just about anything. Like if you take a photograph, you can chop it up and create a tiling texture out of it from a lot of different materials and surfaces, and I've done that also. But anyways, point is. Take your pick of some of these that actually are available. You can even be more specific if you want. Try different search terms. Instead of candy, try chocolate or try caramel. Get specific if you want. But my point is there's a lot of things available for you. And I'm just going to use this one because I used it the other day. And I know it works. Again, there's a watermark on it, but we'll just ignore that. We'll just get it just so you can see the process. So I'm just literally going to go take this image and copy it to my desktop, but then I'm going to actually drag it into Unity. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my project window, right click in here and do Show and Explorer, which opens a Windows Explorer window of exactly inside my project folder. And then I'll just go into my assets folder and drag this right in. So this is now going to pop up in my project panel. Bam, there it is, right here. So this, again, is a tiling texture of candy that I could then apply by going, selecting my terrain, edit textures, add texture, and then just click here. Cat hair in my mouth. Anyways, click here and then scroll down until I find that texture. Make this a little bigger so it's easier to find. Scroll back up. Where is it? There it is. Okay. Now if I click here, I click there, I can close that. And then I can adjust this like for smoothness. These are little caramel chunks, so caramel is kind of shiny, a little glossy. So I'll turn my smoothness up a bit because that should be sort of glossy. Now the size, first of all, let me just click. I'll adjust the size later, but I want to see what it looks like first. And then I'll come back in and edit this to tweak it. So I'll click Add. and you see it immediately drops down caramel across the entire thing. And the best way to test your scale, the scale of the tiling texture, is of course hit play. And these are awfully big caramel chunks. And I don't know, it really depends on your personal preference, like what size caramel chunks caramel chunks you intended. If they were really this size, though, if they were really this size, it would have to be basically altering the geometry of the terrain, and because it's not, it really doesn't look right. So scaling it down is going to be a much sort of nicer result. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the play button. I'll go, oops, no, whoops. Let me go back to select the terrain. Now I'm going to go edit texture, and then I'm going to change the size to, I don't know, let's say 5. Let's try that and hit play. Yeah, it's a little bit better. It doesn't feel quite so gigantic and crazy. I might be able to go a little smaller than that, maybe 2 or 3. But you notice again, it's repeating, right? You don't see any seams. You do see a watermark, but you don't see any seams. And that's kind of the point of the tiling texture. If the tiling texture was created properly, and hopefully they are, the ones you find off the internet, as long as it was created properly, you should be able to walk around and not see any seams. Getting rid of the seams is basically, that's what you do in Photoshop when you're creating the tiling texture. Again, which I'll try to cover in a separate video. But yeah, so now we can run around and we see, caramel all across the ground. Now, if you wanted to blend this, let's say you wanted caramel only in certain areas. Like, let's say, I don't know, that's hard. Maybe the mountains are caramel, and then the flat terrain is some other thing. What you'd want to do is you would want to add another texture. So let me find another one. Let's see. Go back to my browser. There we go. Let's close that one. Let's find another one. Again, I'm going to look for power of 2. Oh, you know what? This could be... no, it's not power of 2. Let's see. 512. Okay, now this is a caramel. So there's basically the caramel squares, and then we've got this caramel swirly thing, which actually I do remember. I used this recently too, and it looked pretty cool. So let me get this one. Let me view image. Let me take this. Ignore that phone call that just popped in. All right. Anyways, so I'm going to drag this in. And I'm going to now also drag it in. In fact, I can just drag it right in here. I don't even have to do Show and Explorer. I'll just drag it right in here. I've got that now as another option for me to select, and I'll go in here to my terrain, edit textures, add texture, select the color, bam, select that, and let's go again. Let's go with like 2, and let's see how it looks. And you click add. Now, you notice now I can select between these two, and it didn't change anything here yet. So far right here, it just looks like my base texture, whichever color you pick first, whichever terrain texture you add first, that is going to become your base texture that's just put everywhere. So if you keep that in mind, it could save you some effort, because it just throws that down initially everywhere. So what we'll do here is now I can switch to this texture, and now I can use the brushes. The brushes are kind of pointless unless you have more than one texture. But now that I've got some brushes here, I can go in and start painting. Let's undo that. So I actually will shrink my brush size a little now, and I can start painting in. Although if I'm putting water in there, then it probably won't make sense to do that. Well, let's just put the swirly caramel all over around here, and wherever there's like a slope starting, and you can blend it. Again, you can turn the opacity up and down, and you can sort of blend. You can blend areas, but I'm going to try to blend. Let me turn the opacity down even further. Target strength. Right. So, and there's lighting stuff here now too, but the lighting stuff has changed, by the way. I'm going to try to make a new lighting video soon they basically changed everything just recently. They added um, a new lighting engine, so it's like it's actually totally different now. So I need to update that lighting video, just FYI. But you see, I can basically now start to blend between these two terrain textures, and you can paint it in, paint out, and again keeping your brush soft, low opacity, soft brush. You can sort of blend more gently between these so that it sort of feels like it transitions nicely. It's never going to be perfect, and ideally you'd want to break it up with some models, like maybe some physical, like boulders, or things that you modeled in things that you've modeled in Mudbox or wherever. So let's just say like that, and then so like I'm keeping the sort of the slopes and the cliffs and stuff like that, more of the texture of the hard caramels, and then maybe here I'll actually no, let's go with that. Okay, so maybe this is, let's say that the swirly caramel stuff is like swamp. It's a swamp kind of area, and that sort of makes more sense because it feels liquidy. Let's get back to here. Okay, there we go. And it feels kind of liquidy, and it sort of, that feels right to me, that would be swampy area. And then the hard caramels are like the ground that sort of peeks out, and so that's kind of fun. Now again, if I put the structure, the cottage in here, the cottage would be maybe on stilts. So that would influence my building design. If I build my structure and this is supposed to be swamp area, then the structure should be built on stilts and not just like solid foundation. Because obviously if you're building in a swamp, you need stilts, and you can't just there's no solid ground really to build off of. Although I guess technically this would be, so maybe the structure could go here, and if the structure goes here, doesn't need stilts. If the structure goes over here, it does need stilts, and then this could be like sort of a deeper bog kind of thing. I guess. Anyways, whatever. Decisions. Okay, so there you go. There's a terrain. You've got some tiling textures on it, and again, I will try to create a Photoshop tutorial on how to create tiling textures, and I will also try to update my lighting video to new information for the Enlighten for Unity, which is their new engine. Okay, hopefully you guys appreciate this and enjoy it, and you color some really awesome terrains that are exciting and interesting. Don't forget to use the paint height, to sort of create plateaus and areas for structures or for roads or whatever. You might want to also create a road texture, right? So far I created a swampy texture and then like sort of a solid ground texture. The next step maybe would be to find another tiling texture that works for like a road texture. I don't know what it's made of, maybe peppermints or chocolate, I don't know. That's up to you, but find good stuff, find good textures, or or create them if you stick around and watch my Photoshop tutorial. But hopefully you have fun, and I'll see you guys next time.